Today, April 29, 2026, the eyes of the world are fixed on Ankara. President Erdogan has made the most consequential foreign policy statement of his 23-year grip on Turkish politics, declaring before Parliament that Turkey's continued membership in NATO is, and I quote from the official translation, under active strategic review in light of the alliance's failure to respect Turkey's sovereign security interests. On the surface, it looks like another Erdogan negotiating gambit, another theatrical move from the master dealmaker of the Eastern Mediterranean, another bluff designed to extract concessions from Brussels and Washington. But is this truly a bluff, or is it the opening salvo of the most dramatic alliance realignment since France withdrew from NATO's integrated military command in 1966? Because if Turkey actually leaves NATO, the consequences are not regional. They are civilizational. They are the kind of consequences that redraw maps, collapse defense architectures, and force every nation from the Baltic to the Black Sea to recalculate its survival strategy from scratch. What would Turkey's departure mean for NATO's southern flank? How would it affect the alliance's nuclear posture, given that approximately 50 American B-61 nuclear gravity bombs are stored at Incirlik Air Base in southeastern Turkey? What happens to the Bosporus and the Dardanelles, the Turkish straits that control Russia's access from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean? And who benefits most from a NATO without Turkey? Stay with us, because the answers are more devastating than any Western capital is willing to admit publicly. If you want analysis that cuts through the diplomatic theater, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Drop your comments below. Turkey is not Greece. Turkey is not Latvia. Turkey is not one of the small specialized members that contribute niche capabilities to the alliance and could be replaced if lost. Turkey is NATO's second largest military, with over 770,000 active duty and reserve personnel, more than any NATO member except the United States. Turkey controls the Bosporus and the Dardanelles under the Montreux Convention of 1936, the only maritime passage connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, a choke point through which every Russian warship must pass to access the world's oceans from its Black Sea fleet bases in Sevastopol and Novorossiysk. Turkey hosts Incirlik Air Base, the forward deployment facility for approximately 50 American B-61 nuclear weapons, a nuclear sharing arrangement that has been a pillar of NATO's extended deterrence posture since the Cold War. Turkey sits at the geographic hinge between Europe and Asia, between NATO and the Middle East, between the Western Alliance and the Eastern axis that Russia, Iran, and China are assembling. Losing Turkey is not losing a member, it is losing the keystone. The Turkish armed forces operate a formidable conventional military built on a mix of American, European, and increasingly indigenous weapon systems. The Turkish Air Force flies over 240 F-16 Fighting Falcons, making it the fourth largest F-16 fleet on Earth. Turkey's indigenous defense industry, led by companies like Baykar, Aselsan, and Roketsan, has produced the Bayraktar TB2 combat drone, the weapon system that rewrote the rules of modern warfare in Nagorno-Karabakh, Libya, and Ukraine. Turkey is currently developing the TFX Khan fifth-generation stealth fighter, an indigenous platform designed to replace the F-16 fleet and reduce Turkey's dependence on American weapons suppliers. The Hisar family of air defense missiles, the SAM cruise missile with a range of over 250 kilometers, the Altay main battle tank, the Milgem-class corvettes and frigates of the Turkish Navy. Turkey is building a defense industrial base that can sustain military operations independently of NATO supply chains. This is not the behavior of a country bluffing about departure. This is the behavior of a country preparing for it. The nuclear dimension is the most sensitive and the most dangerous. Approximately 50 B-61 nuclear gravity bombs are stored in underground vaults at Incirlik Air Base under a dual-key arrangement that requires both American and Turkish authorization for release. If Turkey leaves NATO, those weapons must be removed. The logistics of withdrawing 50 nuclear weapons from a potentially hostile country under crisis conditions have been war-gamed by the Pentagon repeatedly, and the scenarios are uniformly terrifying. A cooperative withdrawal, negotiated over months, is the best case. A crisis withdrawal, conducted under time pressure with Turkish cooperation uncertain, risk accidents, interception, or the unthinkable scenario of nuclear weapons falling outside American control. The mere possibility of this scenario, the mere whisper of it in classified briefings, is enough to give every defense planner in Washington insomnia measured in decades. The Straits question is equally consequential. Under the Montreux Convention, Turkey controls the Bosporus and the Dardanelles and has the authority to restrict naval transit during wartime. If Turkey departs NATO and aligns, even partially with Russia, the convention's provisions could be reinterpreted to favor Russian naval access while restricting Western naval movements. Russia's Black Sea Fleet, currently bottled up by Turkish-controlled choke points, would gain unrestricted access to the Mediterranean, the Suez Canal, and the Indian Ocean. NATO's ability to project naval power into the Black Sea, already limited by Montreux's provisions on non-Black Sea state warship transit, would collapse entirely. The Eastern Mediterranean, currently a NATO-dominated theater, would become a contested space with Russian naval forces operating from Syrian bases at Tartus and Latakia, now with unrestricted resupply through the Turkish Straits. In Moscow, the strategic implications of a Turkish NATO departure are being studied with the intensity of a general reviewing a battle plan that might actually be executed. Russia gains a neutral or friendly Turkey on its southern flank, removing the threat of NATO air operations from Turkish bases against Russian positions in Syria, the Caucasus, and potentially Crimea. Russia gains potential access to unrestricted straight transit. Russia gains the spectacle of NATO's second largest military walking away from the alliance, a propaganda victory that would reverberate through every capital in the developing world that has been told NATO is the indispensable alliance. In Beijing, a Turkey outside NATO is a Turkey available for deeper Belt and Road integration, deeper Shanghai Cooperation Organization participation, and deeper economic alignment with the Eastern Bloc that China is assembling. The Middle Corridor, the Trans-Caspian trade route connecting China to Europe through Central Asia and Turkey, becomes more viable, more attractive, and more strategically significant if Turkey is no longer bound by NATO alignment constraints. In Tehran, Turkey's departure from NATO removes the alliance's only member state that shares a border with Iran, eliminating a potential staging area for NATO operations against Iranian territory and transforming Turkey from a NATO outpost into a potential mediator or even partner in the emerging Eastern security architecture. In Washington, the scenario is a nightmare from which there is no clean awakening, because losing Turkey means losing the southern anchor of the containment line that has held from the Baltic to the Mediterranean since 1952, and no amount of Polish bases, Romanian deployments, or Greek port agreements can replace what Turkey provides by geography alone. First, Turkey's departure from NATO would be the most significant alliance rupture since the founding of the organization in 1949, more consequential than France's 1966 withdrawal because France never controlled a strategic choke point or hosted American nuclear weapons. Second, the nuclear dimension creates a crisis within the crisis, because the withdrawal of 50 B-61 weapons from Incirlik under anything less than fully cooperative conditions is a scenario that the non-proliferation community has identified as one of the highest risk nuclear security events imaginable. Third, the loss of Turkish choke point control over the Bosporus and Dardanelles would fundamentally alter the naval balance in the Eastern Mediterranean, transforming a NATO-dominated theater into a contested space where Russian surface combatants and submarines operate with supply lines that no Western Navy can interdict. Fourth, the precedent of NATO's second largest military leaving the alliance would shatter the perception of alliance permanence that has been the foundation of Euro-Atlantic security for 3/4 of a century, encouraging other members with grievances to reconsider their own commitments. Fifth, the primary beneficiaries would be Russia, which gains straight access and flank security, China, which gains a transit corridor and a partner, and the multipolar coalition that has been arguing for decades that the Western alliance system is a relic of a world that no longer exists. The old alliance is cracking, not from the edges, not from the small members whose departure would be manageable, but from the keystone, the geographic hinge that holds the entire Southern architecture together. If Turkey goes, the Mediterranean becomes Russian. The Black Sea becomes a Russian lake with an open door. The nuclear weapons at Incirlik become the most dangerous loose ends in the history of arms control. And NATO, the most celebrated military alliance in modern history, discovers that it was never as permanent as it believed. What do you think Turkey will ultimately decide? Will Erdogan pull the trigger on NATO withdrawal, or is this the most expensive bluff in diplomatic history? Drop your honest assessment in the comments. We read every single one. If this analysis opened your eyes, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Until next time, stay sharp.